Welcome to the Too Lazy to Read podcast. This is the latest version of what was attempted years ago as Ricochet Out Loud. 2 Liters 2R is simply designed for those too busy to read. The content is stolen from the finest newsletter, better known as the Ricochet Daily Shot, written by Fred Cole, edited by John Gabriel. The 2 Liters 2R is a creation by Ricochet member Curious John in an attempt to expand Ricochet. Curious John, believe the greatest posts of Ricochet as well as the Daily Shot could be converted into podcast form like the following. This recording is made with the use of 2 websites, from text-to-speech.com and tunes2tube.com. If this idea has any legs, it can be harnessed as another source of sponsorship and a revenue stream for Ricochet.com's audio network. Today's 2 Liters 2R is read by George. It was originally written for Thursday, June 08, 2017. ISIS attacks, Iran. Yesterday a pair of simultaneous attacks was carried out in Tehran, leaving 12 people dead and 42 injured. One attack took place at the Iranian parliament and the other at the mausoleum of Ayatollah Khomeini. Significantly, responsibility for the attacks was claimed by ISIS. The 2 attacks were very different in nature. The mausoleum strike was a suicide bomber. The parliament attack was carried out by several gunmen dressed as women who made their way into an administrative building and may or may not have taken hostages. These pair of events are thought to be the first terrorist attacks in Tehran in more than a decade and the first major terror attack on Iran since 2010. It's also the first time ISIS has claimed credit for an attack inside Iran. While in excess of 90% of the Iranian population is Shia, Sunnis make up 5 to 10% of the population, mostly Kurds, Turkmen, Laristani, and Balochs. ISIS has recently shifted their propaganda campaign to target Iranian Sunnis, including a documentary-style video released in March, and released the 3 most recent issues of their magazine in Farsi. Before now, they've only had scattered articles in Farsi. So what's the fallout from this? That remains to be seen. The Iranian government has already been fighting ISIS for years in Iraq and Syria. But this attack could be caught up with the larger Iranian-Saudi power struggle, with the Revolutionary Guards already accusing the Saudi government, and the U.S., of course, of being behind the attack. The storm before the storm. Yesterday, a quartet of top national security officials appeared before the Senate Intelligence Committee. In theory, they were there to discuss the FISA Amendments Act, which expires at the end of the year. Instead, in a prelude to James Comey's testimony today, the fireworks start at 10 a.m. ET/7 a.m. PT, they're even gonna preempt Y&R for it. They talked instead about President Trump, Michael Flynn, and the Russia investigation. So what did they say? Not a lot. Despite being pushed by senators, both Republican and Democrat, the intel bigwigs mostly spent time dodging questions, then asking for a closed-door session. However, NSA head Admiral Michael Rogers said, "I have never been directed to do anything I believe to be illegal, immoral, unethical, or inappropriate." Senators don't like being told no, so they weren't especially happy with those replies. Senator Angus King, demanded to know if executive privilege was being invoked and what the legal basis was for them not answering the questions. Coates replied, "I'm not sure I have a legal basis," and repeated that he would talk behind closed doors. Intel Chair Senator Richard Burr, RNC, chastised the men, saying, "At no time should you be in a position where you come to Congress without an answer, and that, it may be in a different format but the requirements of our oversight duties and your agencies demand it." There is some talk that their refusal could be considered contempt of Congress. And then there was John McCain, ROS. Okay, so these senators were asking about conversations that had already been reported. An exasperated McCain said the refusal of Coates and company to answer questions on those conversations shows what kind of an Orwellian existence that we live in. Elaborating, a chair in a public hearing before the American people, "We can't talk about what was described in detail in this morning's Washington Post." You've got a heck of a sense of timing there, boss. Well, it would probably be a top story any other day. Yesterday President Trump announced that he plans to nominate Christopher Wray to be the next FBI director. And by announced, we mean he tweeted it yesterday morning. So much for that theory that his tweets don't matter. Unfortunately for Wray, the announcement was bungled and the news was entirely wiped out by the above two items, plus the early release of James Comey's opening statement. So who is this guy? He ran the DOJ's criminal division from 2003 to 2005. These days he's a partner at DC law firm King & Spalding. He's also represented several large companies that have been involved in federal litigation. He's said to be close to Chris Christie. And by close, we mean that he represented Christie during the Bridgegate investigation. We're sure we'll hear more about this guy in the weeks to come. His Wikipedia page is pretty thin, and he still needs to be confirmed by the Senate, a process that's likely to be interesting. And you thought your Aunt Gertrude was old. Researchers reported yesterday that fossils found in Morocco set a record as the oldest known remains of Homo sapiens, and thereby turned our understanding of human evolution upside down. Back in 1961, some miners in Morocco found skull fragments and some flint blades. However, it wasn't until decades later that they were closely examined. Scientists used a thermoluminescence technique to test the age of the blades, which turned out to be 300,000 years old. That matters because until now the oldest human fossils, found in Ethiopia, were dated to 195,000 years ago. The theory was that we evolved there and spread around Africa, only leaving the continent 70,000 years ago. That theory is now out the window. Maybe he can find a way to make it up to her. Sherry Jaffet is a freelance makeup artist in Boise and also a stand-up comedian. However, it was for that former occupation that she was recently called on by Lori Otter, wife of Idaho's governor, Butch Otter. The First Lady wanted Jaffet to do her makeup for an upcoming television appearance. As much as she wanted to help, Jaffet declined the offer. Why? Because in April, Governor Otter, side note here, we find the name Governor Otter to be hilarious, vetoed a cosmetology licensing reform bill. It would have legalized the thing Jaffet has been doing for 20 years, doing makeup. You see, the law would have exempted makeup artists from the state's odious licensing requirements. Which, among other things, requires 467 days of training in makeup and hairstyling to get a license. It would have legalized Jaffet and others to do in-home makeup and other stylist-on-demand services. Think you were for makeup, although to be fair to Gov. Otter, he claimed he was open to exemptions but vetoed the bill because it had too many other flaws. Of course, left unspoken by Otter is why makeup artists need to be licensed in the first place. Seems like the kind of thing Yelp could handle, doesn't it? 0 stars. I wanted to look like a prostitute, but not a French one. After all, if she's good enough for the governor's wife, why does she need 467 days of training? Meanwhile, at Ricochet. Yesterday the Department of Justice told Congress of its plan to end a notorious Obama-era corporate extortion scheme. Ricochet member Rush Babe 49, who is a wonderful person, by the way, explains the nuts and bolts of what's changing. Sam Quinones's Dreamland is billed as the true tale of America's opiate epidemic. Is that so? Ricochet community moderator Midget Faded Rattlesnake gives her judgment of the book. A recent Axios headline declared automation to be the middle-class worst enemy. But is it really? Worry not, Ricochet contributor James Pethokoukis is on the case. New Ricochet podcasts. With all eyes on Washington today for the testimony of James Comey, on the Daily Standard, Michael Warren and Eric Felton discuss what the former FBI director will have to say. On a new podcast, Danielle Pletka sits down with Elliot Abrams for the first of a 3-part discussion about 50th anniversary of the Six-Day War and how it shaped the world we live in today. This week on Radio Deplorable, Dave Carter sits down with Ricochet alum Emily Isfahani Smith to talk about her new book, The Power of Meaning. Dave describes her book as a gracefully written and very compelling work, and after listening to this podcast, you just may agree. Whether it's just spending the morning playing Pai Gow at your local casino or an afternoon driving your boat on a crowded waterway, the right way to prepare is with a 3-martini lunch. Jim Garrity of National Review and Greg Corombos of Radio America discuss the tensions between President Trump and his AG and share their surprise at seeing ISIS attack Iran. Today, in history. On this day in 1789, then Congressman James Madison introduced 12 proposed amendments to the United States Constitution. You might know them better as the Bill of Rights. Wait, 12? Yeah, well 10 of them became the Bill of Rights. One of them wasn't adopted until 1992, which is its own interesting tale, as the 27th Amendment. And that 12th one? Well, technically it's still out there waiting for ratification. It only needs 27 more states. On this day in 1783, the Icelandic volcano Loki began an 8-month eruption that started a 7-year famine and killed more than 9,000 people. Also a whole bunch of flights had to be rerouted. On this day in 1912, Universal Pictures was incorporated by Carl Laemmle. We've also seen the date of April 30th. Either way, now you know who to blame for RIPD. We heartily recommend. This week the criminal trial against Bill Cosby began, the culmination of a series of events set in motion by comedian Hannibal Buress in 2014. If you're interested in learning more about the case and Cosby, we heartily recommend Cosby Unraveled. This podcast began a few weeks ago with a deep dive into the background of Cosby and the history surrounding the case against him. Sexual assault, justice, class, race, gender, history, politics, there's a lot to unravel there. And now they're putting out daily updates on the progress of the trial, so it's unclear what will happen when there are breaks in the trial, or what happens after. Hopefully they'll avoid the trap that other podcasts fall into of cranking out an episode even during periods when there's nothing new going on. Be forewarned, however, that this podcast was produced by a public radio station from Philadelphia, and sounds like it. So if you're one of those people who can't stand the soft-toned pondering of public radio, hey, no judgment, tastes vary, then this podcast might not be right for you. Upcoming Ricochet member meetup. Event. Las Vegas, July 21st. Reagan Library, Simi Valley, California, July 23rd. These events are for Ricochet members only, but if you are not a member, you should join now. Once again, the content was stolen from The Daily Shot without their permission. This podcast is not, at least not yet, a production of Ricochet.com. Let's see if 2 Liters 2R can win its way into whatever Rob Long has cooked up to rival NPR. Written by Fred Cole. Edited by John Gabriel. Become a Ricochet member. Copyright 2017 Ricochet, all rights reserved. The Daily Shot is written and distributed by Ricochet.com.